everybody. Now, before I start tonight, Dale.
Yes, Howard.
Firstly, welcome.
Yeah, thanks, mate.
But subscribe.
Yeah.
Our sub numbers are down the last 6 weeks since Summer Nats, so we need everyone jump in and subscribe. So
I think we've got a Summer Nats hangover, perhaps. I don't know.
But we're going to, because we did really well through that period.
Yep.
But anyhow, subscribe, like, do all that stuff, and we've left that alone a bit.
Yeah.
And maybe that's why everybody on
we
YouTube,
need to bother you a bit more.
That's it.
Yeah.
So tonight, there's a job that I took on. Had a guy contact me through Facebook. He had a hard top / coupe that someone had run. It was a complete car. It was his mum's car.
Yep.
And he had either had inherited or was about to inherit, and someone run up the back of it.
Did a good job.
And when he went to take it to get repaired, everywhere he took it, they said it needs a new quarter. And we all know you can't buy a quarter.
Yep.
And he contacted me about that and sent me some photos. And I said to him, look, I think I can fix that.
Yeah.
And he'd already stripped it out. So he was insured and he got a payout because he knew he had to either get it fixed or they're going to write it off because they couldn't get a quarter for it.
Yep.
And it was a bit of a family heirloom thing. So XB, yellow in colour, and we'll start heading through it. So it looks pretty good there, Dale, but the next photo gives us the problem. So it was a four-wheel drive that sort of got him, he was turning a bit left. They tried to avoid the accident.
Yep.
Moved over left-hand nose of the four-wheel drive.
Just in the wrong spot.
Give it a shunt in the back. And it effectively, you know, if it was a normal panel job, it'd be a new boot, new quarter, new taillight panel and, you know, grafted on, it'd be all good.
Yep.
But of course we know it's not, so that wasn't the case. So, like I said, he'd already stripped the car out before it came down. So we got it down, checked it out, and it had a fair bit of rust happening as well. It was It was a vinyl roof car.
Okay. Yep.
And the plan was to get rid of that, but the initial deal with me was let's get the dent fixed, and then we'll see how long that takes, and then how much money he's got and where we go, and you'll see how that eventuates as we go through. So probably a bit nastier in there than they thought it was when it was complete.
A little bit of cancer there. Yep.
And we'll see as we strip it down what happens. So the interesting thing about this one, Dale, was normally, as you know, I strip the car right down and then I blast the whole thing and clean it all up and find out what we're going to do because we do complete cars.
Yep.
You'll see in this one it looks a bit different because we're only bare metaling to where we're working.
Yes.
Which doesn't look as neat as what I normally do because part of the car's still got the paint on it or the
I know you found that a bit of a challenge, sort of feeling like you're doing half a car or half a job. But
well, it's just like I like to look around when I'm doing things and know that the whole thing's going to be nice.
Yep.
But this was almost a bit of an over Christmas job that I'd snuck in for him to try and get it done. I think it ended up with us about 7 months in the end. So that was the dent and the rust around the rear.
Yep.
And before I took it on, I had to talk to Dave next door because I had no way of pulling it.
No.
Because I don't have, you know, anything in the floor or whatever. Like when I was in Broken
solid
Hill,
anchor points. Yep.
You know, Dad's workshop had the stuff in the floor and all those sort of things to be able to pull it out. But so I spoke to Dave, and Dave has got like a gantry in his shed with solid posts either end. So I knew if he was happy to do that, we could set it up between the two posts, and you'll see what we did. So before we got to that point, we decided we'd take the paint off inside and out so that I could work the metal when I was pulling it. And I'd already worked out when I looked at the car before I took the job on was that it already had a quarter replaced on it at some stage. So we're just in that paint strip stage, and obviously I've got to repair that boot to be able to know where the quarter's got to end up. So we took on the boot lid at the same time, and obviously we're going to do the whole rear end, and we'd already pretty much worked out we need to do the rust in the boot area while we're at it. So we stripped it off, and then the other concern I had, so the photo here on the hoist, and you can see I've got some stands there. I've actually put them under the chassis, and then I've just used the old normal level, like a timber level that you do build in your house, to put the chassis square and screw it up, because I don't have a chassis bench.
Yep.
And then check the level across the radiator support panel, cross members all the way through
Yep.
to make sure when it got hit in the rear, it didn't twist up that rear
Yes.
end. Unfortunately for us, it didn't. So we were able to then sort of go, well, let's get on with it.
Got some reference points to work off.
Yeah, so we pulled the skin off that boot lid, and it wasn't too bad. Had a few little issues, but not too bad, the usual stuff. And sent the frame off to be blasted, and then we cleaned up that skin, and it only had a couple of little spots in it. You can see there a little bit of weld down the bottom.
Yep.
We did a couple of pinholes, but other than that, it was pretty good. And then put that in epoxy, and you can see there in that one where it's hanging the dents in it. So I would have just knocked them around a bit, the best I could, and then put it back together using some Sika urethane sealer to glue those two panels back together, and then knock the edge back over. And of course, we're just doing a resto here, so we're not welding stuff up, we're just putting it back to original and getting it ready. And part of the issue in doing all of that was to then make sure of what we've got. So the shot from underneath there at the back, all those normal rusty areas were sort of stripped back and cleaned up before we took it over Dave's. So this shot now is over at Dave's. So what we've got is we've hooked the front of the car up to the 4x4 steel pillar that's bolted to the floor, and it's got a big massive crane gantry across the top for his outboard motors, and then hooked the chain up to the other end, and then I worked out where the angle I thought the car had been hit from. So you can see it's got stands under it there.
Yes.
So I'm making sure that the rails are fixed.
Yep.
So when I'm pulling it, it's not pulling it down. And then at the same time, I've welded steel plates onto the corner of the quarter and start putting some load on. Now you can see the bit of wood under the chain.
Yep.
It's probably meant to be a hydraulic ram or something. I didn't have one of those. So
No, well, you improvise.
that's getting my angle right. As it's pulling, I can see what the metal's doing. So I need to make sure as it pulls, it's pulling on the right angle.
Correct.
And then I'm applying a bit of heat just to get those creases to come out.
Because if you can pull it on the angle that it went in,
It should come out.
it should be straightforward.
It should be. So we kept tinkering away, and it's getting a bit further and a bit further. And then the problem normally comes around once you start to really get to that last bit, it wants to pull the end out of the sill, out of the quarter.
Yes.
So normally what and I'm sure I did it on this one, was put a plate in behind
Right.
and then put a bolt through it. So you're actually pulling the whole end.
Yes.
But initially I had to get all of the bits out.
You got to pull a crinkle out, haven't you?
Exactly right. And of course down the bottom where that slot is for the light, that was causing me a bit of grief. And I thought, you know what, I've got a press over there that we make them
There's
with.
a little jig that we've used.
So
Yes.
I went and got that and bolted that in to
Yep.
keep that lower section square.
Okay.
And then as you can see there now, I'm welding more plates on.
Oh, you're a thinker, H.
Yeah. And then, keep working our way along.
Yep.
And obviously that's got to a point there where I was happy because there's no chains on it anymore.
It looks like a quarter again.
And it sort of got the shape, and then the idea was to get it back over my place on the hoist. So that's it back on the hoist at my joint. So I'm just welding up where I was pulling all that weight to get a bit of steel back in that corner.
Yep.
And more weld and a bit of sanding and grinding. And now to get all of that crinkled metal, you can see I've had a fair bit of heat on there when I'm
Yep.
knocking it around and shaping it up to get it back into the right shape. And you can see there now that's getting real close.
You need a bit of heat when you iron your clothes, so
That's it.
Same thing with the quarter.
When we've talked about it so much before, metals, you either shrink it or you stretch it,
Yep. Correct.
and you either do that with pressure or with heat. So you're either going to hit it with a hammer,
Yep.
and make it thinner, which makes it grow,
Makes it go
or you've got to
somewhere.
pull the metal back in and
Yep.
make it thicker, which will make it shrink. So that's the principle I've always worked on. So there probably was a good half a day messing around with dollies and flippers, and you can see there I'm at a point where I've been filing away, and the issue comes down, you can't file forever because there'll be nothing left.
Correct.
But I got it pretty close, and then I've just jumped in now because I've started doing some of the rust repairs at the same time. I probably got to that point where I went, you know what, I need to walk away for a while.
Yep.
So the lower portion of the car wasn't too bad, but I replaced both of those when I spoke the other day that I normally do those.
Yes.
When we were on the Cobra and we didn't do them. So these ones came out, and it was interesting. You see the spring hanger there.
Mm-hmm.
Normally I've got the car stripped.
Correct, yes.
In this case, I've got the diff still in it. And it was amazing how much harder it makes it.
Mm.
So I often see people on Facebook and stuff where they're working on their car on the ground and they don't have a lot of room and all. But having done this car, I would recommend to people to spend that 2 hours or whatever to pull the diff out,
Yep.
put it on some stands, because the amount of time I lost by having to have to work around that spring was unbelievable. Because I just couldn't get in with the chisel or whatever I was working
just the
with.
angles you're working on.
And then the spot welder and all those sorts of things.
Clearance. And
So we've
else.
cleaned all that up and got the new one all organised with some weld through on it. And then the outside, both sides had a little bit of rust in the corners, but they were pretty good. So I just cut those corners out. And the shot there now with the sill panel, and you can see and this is that thing that I've found difficult, because now I'm going, I want to look where the quarter panel joins the sill, because I knew the quarter had been changed, and as it turned out, lucky we did, because it had some bronze and stuff on it.
Yep.
But it was also a Fairmont, so someone had welded up the holes for the pins from the moulding.
The moulding, yep.
And given them a tap and bogged them over. So we then ended up working our way along the sill and fixing, pulling those out as well. So here's that little corner cut out, and you can see the rust on the inside. So even when they don't look rusty, they're normally rusty.
It's like an iceberg, isn't it?
It is. Once you start,
10% you can see, 90% you can't.
Exactly right. So sequencing is a problem, and I've got about 300 photos here, so we're going to jump around a little bit. But Jared, that owns the car, is up from Newcastle way, but he came down a few weekends and gave me a hand, and I had him in here stripping all this out by hand. So paint stripper and then wire wheels, and you're good at that, aren't you? So
plenty of practice.
I got him to get in there and do that. I said, like, we're this far now, and we're doing rust and stuff. Get in there and clean it out properly.
Yep.
So that's the spot welder doing those inners. And now we've progressed along where we've got all of that inside stripped out so that we can seal it up, because they're 40 years old. And I said to him, you're this far down the track, let's get the arse end of it all done properly.
Don't do half a job.
And I'd already stripped the inside because I need to get in the panel beat, because that bituminous stuff on there makes it really difficult. So I decided to get all that boot opening done, and like I said, it was around Christmas time, and Darren had some time off, so this was all me.
Yes.
And it had been a while since it was all me. So I jumped in, and some of the bits that we might have used or we normally have, we didn't have. So I had to make it up a bit as I went. But what I did do was try and maintain as much of the original metal as I could. So what we call the boot corner, so that lower corner had rust in the gutter, but the majority of it was good, and I didn't see the sense in undoing all of the corner and the factory welds when I could just fix what needed to be fixed. So both sides were pretty much the same, except obviously on the right hand side that had been pushed in and pulled out and straightened up. So I got myself to a point where I could start putting it back together. So the vertical panel under the back window was rusty.
Yes.
And then the top panel. And so I stripped all that out, got myself started. And you can see here where the clamp is there. That one's out of sequence because that's better now. So I've actually bent up a bit of angle to go along, because the quarter panel steps down and comes out flat.
Yes.
And then there's a U-piece that goes underneath that creates the channel. And a lot of the repo stuff is not made that way. It's made in one piece.
Yeah.
So I've done this as per original.
Yeah, more factory. Yep.
So I've made that, and then I've got a piece of our universal U-section to go on there that's made for the boot channel. and then where the yellow is still on the bottom corner, I've cut that off, and then I've made up a piece of angle, and you can see just above the welder that's hanging over the bottom there, it's just a bit of angle, and I put in the shrinker stretcher and made it the right size.
Yep, get the radius, yep.
Welded that in so it would then take the U shape again that goes underneath. But I didn't have any.
You might have to make some.
So I've got a sedan one.
Oh, okay.
Right, which is the sedan one comes in two pieces, the one we sell.
Okay.
And I had one of those, so I pinched the bits off of that and shrink stretched them a bit and made them fit.
Little modification.
Yeah, so I got them to fit. So it's sort of, sometimes you just got to do what you got to do. And then across the bottom, that wide shot there, you can see the tacks across. So I've put one of those repair sections right away across.
Yep.
So it gives me that around the corner where all the pliers are there, where all the vice grips are on there, and then fully weld all of those bits in. And then that's that bit that goes from underneath. It's in my glove there, so you can see how rusty it was.
Yeah. You couldn't not do it properly.
Yeah, so you take that out, throw that away, extend that lip back out where it was rusty, put a new bit on that, and then put the new channel up from underneath.
Yeah, gives it something solid to...
Look at all them tools on the floor in there, Dale. Must have been, that's Howard doing what Howard does.
Yeah.
So, jumped a couple of photos there because they're all the same. So the corner, that's the original still, and I've been able to hammer that up and get it into shape, and I've got that boot channel now all fitting nice.
You wouldn't know it had been smacked in the...
And coming around the corner, and at the same time I've been able to repair above the tail light,
Yes.
knock all that into shape. And then the other side, how nice that looks. So that's all factory, the bronze in the corners and all. So when I'm done, it'll all be original.
It's only the channel that you've replaced, but
exactly right.
Looks spot on.
So the shot there now, which is the parcel shelf, and this is the one I find a bit hard to in my mind, like all underneath in the boot's all dirty still, and the parcel shelf and all the front, where I'm normally looking at my photos and it's all pristine.
Yeah.
Well, this is just because we're only doing half of it. So the shot there with the copper is me where I've drilled out all the spot welds. I'm just going along welding up to make sure I've got plenty of meat.
Yes.
So when I put the shelf and all back in and spot weld it, there's plenty of meat there to be able to do it. So those little U channels, I've run the spot welder along.
So if there's not enough material, when the spot welder goes on there, it won't
exactly right.
bind the metal together.
So looking at those big arms there, I'd say Darren's back. So I've got all that done.
You've got your hired help.
And he's on the machine putting all, because I had it all cleckoed in when he got back.
Yeah.
So that's the shelf, obviously, and the strip across where the weld-through primer I've got on there is where that vertical panel sits. And I do it this way. I don't like to leave weld-through primer on the job when I go to epoxy.
No.
Because I've just found from experience it doesn't seem to want to stick real nice. The weld through I've been using is an enamel based, it's a copper infused enamel.
Yes.
And I don't like to leave it on there. No. So I'll mask that up, paint it just where I need it, put the part on, spot weld it on, clean it all up, so when it's epoxy it should be all metal. And that's it in place there now, and it's obviously been cleaned up. So it's been spotted and cleaned up, and the top's been now painted, ready to take the next panel. So that's just a case of getting everything in its place, trial fitting that top section, which is that one. Now this is one of the repo ones that we reshape, and this was the first version, and now we don't do that one anymore. We just do the full version where we actually reshape the top ridges, but also the rubber channel. Okay. So there's made up the jig for the press, so when it goes around and hammers, it actually reshapes that, because when it comes from Rares, it's round, and from the factory it's squarish, and runs through the pull max and fixes it up. So that's it, pretty much all ready to take that rear panel, and you'll see in a minute. So just a couple of nice ones, all the spot welds all in place, both sides, and then all of that area there is now ready to go and get some epoxy on it. But before we do that, we just check the back window, and obviously I've cut a little bit of something out of there. just get those corners right.
And the bronze is all from the factory.
Yeah, so I don't know what the go was, whether they put a dab of bronze on and then it went down further and the guy with the spot welded it.
Okay.
That's the only reason I can think of in my head that's why it was done.
Be that way.
But it anywhere you look, the A pillars where it meets the sill, there's a dob on the corners, but they're all spot welded as well.
Yeah.
So I'm not quite sure what the story was there. So you can see in that photo of the quarter panel, just up near the top where the yellow is, there's 2 lines. Mm-hmm. That's where they've cut, when they put the new quarter on, they just cut through, down from the lead, below the lead, and welded the new bit in. And I left it like that. I can't remember whether I hammered it up a bit, but so the roof was pretty good on this car. So what you see there now with the masking, it's in the booth. Because I've got a fair bit to do still on the quarters and I've still got to go across the back window, I want to seal this up.
Yes.
So it's all prepped now for urethane. So that's Vibrance epoxy urethane. And all nice and clean, none of that copper showing. And you can see the masking on the top edge of the vertical. That's so when I prime it, I don't cover up the weld through.
Yes.
And there it is in epoxy, and the inside of that panel. So when we go to put it all together in a minute, it'll all be primed inside and out. And that's that corner I was talking about. So it's all factory and got that nice,
you wouldn't know it's
never been there look.
No.
And then you'll see the next photo, the one after, not quite so good on that side, but Howard's pretty good on the filler. So I reckon that's not a bad result from where it was, and that's still original. So I want to say it's still original. It's original after someone else replaced the quarter probably 20 years previous, which was probably most of what we're looking at there that doesn't look right. So all of that's prepped up, and then we now put that rear window panel on, weld that into place. As I've spoken before, I weld through that between the top of the quarter and the top of the panel. I fully weld it and then cut back in the slot so that it looks factory, but it's all one piece. And I do that because it's a rust area.
Yes.
And it tends to come out. So that's all looking nice and smooth and in its place. And I would think somewhere along the line here, we're probably going to do a double check on that boot lid and the rubber and all. Now this was a couple of shots of Jared on the paint stripper inside the boot, and that's where the stripper's working like I say it should do. You paint it on and it peels off.
Yes.
So he spent a couple of days in there.
You're going to say that wasn't a 5-minute job.
No, that was a bit of time. And then the outside as well. Now that's starting to look like it's getting ready to get some primer. It's interesting there, that's well out of sequence because the yellow's still on the rear window.
Yeah.
But I wanted to get in the paint strip part of it. So that's the boot lid being trial fitted with the original back window panel. To make sure that's all going to fit. And there's a good shot of that.
Double join.
The join. And it's now got the back window in, so we're back on track now. So being a vinyl roof car, that join would have been under the vinyl roof.
Yes.
So they've probably gone, oh, this is easy.
Yeah.
So I can't remember whether it had a bit of filler in it, which it probably did. And then you can see the dots across where I've been grinding and filing and stuff. That's the holes from the chrome strip from the vinyl roof.
Yes.
That's a better shot there now, looking from the front, looking backwards. And then you can see the creases and all in this new quarter.
Yeah, new sort of second-hand-ish.
Yeah, it was probably a brand new one, but it
probably
just,
was.
These cars,
it's a long time ago.
These cars always got run into.
Well, big cars, hard to avoid.
Exactly right. So
there's
a fair bit of messing about. Now I am with me Tasmanian oak. So that's a bit of 50 by 4 mil.
Yep.
So it's nice and flexible and holds its shape. Boat building, Dale.
Invaluable. This tool has been used. I think he's got a part number on this.
Yeah, Bunnings. So those little spots I've welded them. So I've now just got a pin, given them a pull, and what I would do there is put the slide hammer on it and don't bang it with a slide hammer. Actually lift it up and tap around it with the hammer.
Yep.
And then sometimes it
Just
might
so you
just
can
want a
make
little
it
bit of heat
just a fraction
to get
per
it
hour.
to hold, and then give it a file and they come up nice. There's a nice big dent just over the wheel arch there that had to be pushed out. Now this back corner was a bit of a mess from me pulling, but also from the bloke putting it on, and I think there's a good photo of it in a minute. So there's those dents starting to be pushed out and hammered around. So that's that sill, and you can see the bronze, so that's not factory, that's from whoever put the quarter on.
Yep.
And that's the photo I was looking for. So that was...
looks a bit ghastly, really.
That was all just bogged up.
Yeah.
Pretty much from the guy that put the quarter on. So you can see they've bronzed the quarter on,
yes,
where normally that'd be spot welded.
Yeah.
So I worked my way around that and put some metal in there and made it nice. And just kept more weld, because I had to keep pushing to get the shape. So I made some templates of the other side to make
mirror the
so
shape.
I've got that red gauge I use,
Yes.
that goes to the shape, but I also use core flute. So I'll make a core flute shape from one side and then mirror image to the other side to make sure I'm getting the right shape.
Add and subtract, add and subtract.
Exactly. So we'll get into a point where Jared said, look, you're going pretty well hours wise. While it's here, can you do the doors and the guards and the roof and so on? So he was still coming down, and you can see inside the car there's parts and stuff, and I'm going, oh, here we go, like we're meant to be just doing this quarter, and the bloody thing looks like a dog's breakfast. So all of that got cleaned up, all of that boot area, and you can see now it's getting pretty close to wanting some epoxy on it by the look of it. A good shot of it there. So that quarter looks real close now.
Yes.
Those dents looking a bit less and less all the time. And at some point very soon, I would run the Scotchy over that whole lot and then hit it with the dioxidine. There you go. It's a good one looking from above there. Just, you can see the lines. I look at that now and I can see the lines are starting to look right. And you've seen enough photos as well now of. And then this is the other side, because it had the usual over the wheel arch dents and stuff in it. And that was the original quarter, that one. And we're up to the lead. So the lead in this was really good from a rust point of view and that sort of thing. But the vinyl roof cars, I don't think got quite the same attention on the finish of the lead at the factory, because they're never quite right. When you pull the roof off, they're not as good as they are if they don't have it. So we've now obviously plasticed up and stripped the roof. By memory, it was pretty good. No one had been moonwalking up there. It's not too bad.
Not as bad as some of the others we've seen, no.
And so it was like, okay, can you do I found a few more bucks, can you do the doors? So we did the usual, and I've trimmed this just back to one side because we've done a few coupes on here now, and I think everyone is starting to get the message. But this is an XB, so it's got the smaller intrusion bars, but it's still got the usual rust. And there's that intrusion bar there, which really wouldn't intrude much at all, would it?
Wouldn't slow much down at all.
So we strip those out, clean them up. Now this is a really good example of why you put epoxy underneath filler. So
100%.
So this would have been, this car had a hit on the front as well. There, I could see where the radiator support panel had some work, and the guard had obviously pushed back on this door and bent it in, and they've given it a quick push, ground it up, bogged it, and painted it, and that's what happens if you don't put your epoxy down first. So that's just a nice...
The bog preserves the rust very well.
It's a nice lesson to learn, and that's just a bit of water on there, which we're probably giving it a dioxidine or something to get the rust and stuff off it. What that front section was like. So once we got the skin off, I went about fixing that up.
Repairing it properly.
Yeah, so we knocked that around and did a few shrinks where it had been, they'd stretched it. I'd say someone had just knocked it in with a hammer and put a coat over it. So cleaned that up, got that pretty close.
It's an easy quick fill, but it don't last if you don't do it properly.
Yeah, It probably got 10 years out of it.
Yeah, well, that's relative.
Well, it's probably a $2,000 car when it got done.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it?
That's the issue.
Yeah.
We all forget. We all think they're
Yeah.
a $100,000 car now, but they used to be under a tree. I'll do it up one day.
Yeah.
And it's worth $2,000. So doors, all off to the blaster. Epoxy everything.
Yep.
These get stripped by us and then painted with epoxy again. And then we reassemble, weld them all back together, fix all the dents. That one there now looks like it's ready for a bit of filler, just around the edge where we've welded and that sort of stuff.
Yep.
Just a goodish. The real rusty ones, you got to take that inner one out as well. But this wasn't too bad. So this, like I said, this was it lived around the lake up near Newcastle somewhere, where the car had been stored for a long time.
A massive intrusion bar, huge.
So the door's back together now. Now I'll put this in to remind me, if you do this, when you go to weld the skin back on, the door's got to go back on the car before it gets welded, because you can twist the frame quite easily, because until that skin's welded on,
it's got no structure, has it?
It's got no structure.
No strength.
So you can put it on, twist it into shape, put the locks on, close it, work out where you want it, and then go about welding them on the car like that.
Okay.
So where we've drilled out the spot welds, we're now welding ups, and then you weld a couple, check it, weld a couple more. I mean, it's quite surprising. Even once they're welded, you can still give them a tweak.
Yes.
A lot harder. You need shoulders.
I couldn't do it. Yeah.
So these are ready now. So you can see a bit of filler on the back one in the front edge there, where it's the seat belt's been jammed in there or something. So we just tidy those up. And then the outside are all deoxidine ready, and everything gets a nice good solid coat of epoxy. And the shell now, we've got that roof stripped. So as I said to you, it was a vinyl roof. This is what's sort of under that. So as you've seen with the XA, we did the 4-door with a vinyl roof. When you pull a roof off, the vinyl off, it's really just primer. There's not a lot of paint under there. And that line of surface rust is where the join was.
So
the stitch join.
Stitch join of the vinyl roof.
And that's where the moisture's getting through the vinyl.
Through the holes in the stitching.
Yeah, and then rusting away on the roof.
Yeah.
So that's it, with a bit of Scotch-Brite run over it, and we would, if need be, we'd use some phosphoric acid, like deoxidine, to convert all that and get it all cleaned up. And like I said, the lead was really good, but not shaped properly, but it was really solid and intact. So I've just run the Scotchy over that to get it ready for some epoxy, like that. And then I'm on the old deadly wheel. So that's the heavy wire wheel on the grinder to do in the drip gutters, which is, you need big arms for that one. And then that's Darren deoxidining the whole lot, getting ready for some primer or some epoxy. So you can see there now that quarter's looking good. So once you get that deoxidine on, you can use the light to see whether you've got your shape.
Put some good lines on it, and it really highlights.
Yeah, if you take your time and do the from front to back like that. So when you consider what damage was done to that, putting that on there now in steel, you can go, I'm pretty happy with what I've achieved in steel. And that boot area now is obviously where I'd sealed it up before. We now sand all that back, and then the whole lot will get epoxied all into one go. So it's looking like it's about to happen, I would say, Dar.
I think so.
And it's still got parts inside. So there it is, and I think there's a little video coming up actually, Dale, of that. So that you can see halfway up the quarter, the joins are still there. So that's steel.
Yes, that's
so
right.
There's no filler. That's the steel. And
pretty happy with it to be that point in steel.
From where it was, for sure. And you can see that back corners, it's still a little bit rough, but a skim will fix that for sure.
Just a little bit of acne, that's all.
So that's the gap. So obviously we haven't removed nothing, and I didn't cut and shut the boot or anything. No. That was the factory fit. But that front gap you can work on a bit more, because I've put that panel in, so you can sneak a mil or two either way, as long as you don't mess up the opening for the glass. And I'm pretty sure we always trial fit the back window before we get too far with it.
Unless you want to do it twice.
But I did do the bottom edge. You know how the boot lid hangs down on the sides?
Well, Jared, it had a smack there too, hadn't it?
Well, Jared was with me that it really, he didn't want it hanging down. So we give it a little clip and welded it up and just a little ruler there. So like I always say, these photos are as much for the owner as they are for me and everyone else. Yeah. So I can say, well, there you go. That's where I got it to in steel. So the boot lid now is back together, which it would have been to trial fit. And now we're at a point that that's well out of sequence because I'll talk about that in a minute. But obviously we kept going then, so it's like, oh, can we keep going? So we stripped all of that back. See, normally that would be done at the blaster.
That's right. Yeah.
Where this, and I think he might have done that as well because I said to him, I'm happy to do it, but I'm not. I'm really not up for.
It was going to be a few week job.
I'm really not up to the old paint strip. But you also just, I mean, you get over it.
Yeah.
You really want to be paint stripping A-pillars and stuff when it could have went to a blaster if you were doing the whole lot when you started. So they're all sealed up there. So they should be another 20 minutes down the track. But anyhow, so quarters on. Now you can see there that dent that was over the wheel arch. Very hard to get in there. That's obviously as good as I could get it, and that would be within a mil or two. But it just always looks worse in a photo. And the doors are now back on and would be getting twisted and shaped and welded back together. And the gaps were pretty good on this car. So this is why I say the other's out of sequence because I knew this lot's coming.
Yes, this was.
So as I always preach, if you're going to do it, now that we've done this much work on your car, you really should be pulling your plenum off.
Exactly.
Okay, can you do that? So here we go again. So I've got a little run of photos and I haven't got both sides, all the way through, but it's take off that support panel, drill out the spot welds, work your way down. And once you start to work your way down, you start finding the reason that you need to do it. And for those diligent people looking now and say, what's all that on the attached to the kick panel there? This guy's an auto electrician, and he'd previously rewired the car and completely de-wired the engine bay. Right. All the solenoids were mounted in behind the splash shields.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's what that is. So go through that process of drilling out spot welds, removing plates. So, driver's side, that's the one I spoke about the other day. It's got a little internal plate, and then you've got to cut the end off of the rail to get the top off, to get the plenum out. And then in a minute, it'll pop off like that. So then that's off. And this is probably one of the best I've ever seen.
For the age,
But as you can tell, there's obviously still some leaves and rubbish, and it's worth doing.
You can't take shortcuts on these cars and have them last.
And want it to last. With what he was doing, and because it was his mum's and he wanted to keep it, I said to him, you're crazy if you don't do it.
Yeah.
So, and you can see there, the majority's painted, but then there's one bit, and I reckon where that's rusting, when it had the accident, they put some heat on there when they've pulled it forward.
Right.
And that's burnt the paint off, and that's why it's rusting.
It's been left,
So this has got those classic signs of everywhere they rust out, it's starting, but it hasn't rusted out yet. So we get in there and start cleaning it out, and then once we Scotch-Brite, so when I say Scotch-Brite, I'm talking strip disc on the 4-inch grinder. So they're really good, and then we've got little ones that go in the drill, and then all different wire wheels and things to get in and around everything. And there I am there on the drill with a wire wheel.
Just taking any impurities off the surface,
just
so you got something.
Get the paint off and all the rust off, and then
so you can seal it.
That same story again. We've gone around and welded up all of the where we've drilled with the spot weld drill, because the spot weld drill's got a little point on it.
Yes.
So it gets pretty thin, if not right through, right in the middle. And I just have found when I go to plug weld them, they don't weld as nicely as if you do this. So if you run around, you spend an hour or whatever, weld them up, and that needed no rust repair.
Wow.
which
That was a good one then.
It was a really good one. Top and bottom. So same here, we're welding up all the holes we drilled from the top to take that off because we were going to put it back on with a spot welder.
Yes.
So we're just cleaning that up, ready to go back on, inside and out.
And of course this would have been one of the quicker ones that you've done, given that it didn't need...
Well, we didn't have to take the bottom off for a starter because there was no lower rust, and then we didn't have to fix corners and make pieces and all that sort of stuff. So obviously they get painted inside, and POR is what's in the tin there, and he's just brushing that on. And this stuff, when you brush it on, it's like a chassis paint. You can brush it on and it settles. It's like self-leveling or something. Yeah. And it comes up shiny.
It looks so good.
This one's a satin, but in the gloss, you'd reckon you sprayed it.
Yep.
So that's the satin. If you do use it, don't use it external because it's not UV stable.
Right.
Noted. There's a clear coat to go over it.
Okay.
If you want to stabilise it.
Stabiliser. Right.
So if you're going to use it on a chassis on a four-wheel drive, or paint your back bumper or something, it's really, really hard. And I've seen them at shows, KBS, these guys, where they have something painted and they've got a ball paint hammer and you can hit it. It's that hard. That's how hard it goes.
Yeah, it is tough. Absolutely. Yeah.
So we do all of that, and we would have had that masked up where we're going to want to weld because you can't. If it's that hard, it doesn't weld real well. So paint it inside and out. And once you get the focus right here, Dale, because I hummed and over, I put this photo in because it's a bit hard to focus. The top of the plenum's upside down and then the plenum's at the back, and I've obviously gone, that's a cool photo.
Just flip it over.
But it's a little bit hard to see it.
Yeah.
And then it flips back over like that, ready to be spot welded and plug welded where it's required. So lots of clamps to hold it in place.
Do you know, was the plan to keep this car the same colour? Was the plan?
I think so, yeah. Still not painted.
Okay, yep.
I'm waiting for the call. Because I've still got the bonnet for it.
Yeah.
Because I haven't finished that because I've been a bit busy doing other things, and he hasn't rang me, so it's still sitting there. He might ring me after he sees this. So you can see in that photo, I've cleaned all around the window opening as well now, because what happens, you paint strip the outside. I like to have all of that back so that when you prime everything, it looks like a new car, because people go, oh, you won't see that?
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. Can do it. So all cleaned up, top of the dash, and now that's been sanded up, ready for epoxy.
Don't do half a job, people.
That's it. So it's all cleaned up, ready for the epoxy, and looking really, really clean and nice. So this is the first coat of epoxy, and now we urethane. And you can sand and then urethane and then epoxy, then prime, wet on wet. Or if you've got lots of time, you can do it a couple of times. But I would normally do that.
Yes.
Give it a scuff, and that's been done obviously with the Sika sealant, automotive sealant. And we put that in, and then rubber glove on, rag, prep sole, and clean it up so that it just fills that crack. We force it in.
Yep. So
that it seals, but I don't want like a bead.
Yeah, you don't want big lumps.
I don't look like a bathroom. Yeah. Don't want to. So there's Darren welding those braces back on now, so the side braces.
Yep.
And this is interesting that we've done all that work, and then he must have said, oh, can we do the pillars and the... Because I would normally strip all underneath that.
Yep.
Where now he's had to do it afterwards, which wouldn't have been much fun. This is the whole thing about planning.
100%. Yep.
But the difficulty is sometimes is that, but I didn't know how long it would take. But ideally, if you're going to do the car properly, do it properly as you're doing it, not doing it and then going back and making life difficult. The picture now of the bonnet being paint stripped, and I found this one really interesting because a couple of things. First of all, it was obviously painted in just normal acrylic, because when you put the paint stripper on, it goes to jelly.
Yes.
And I was reading something the other day, probably on Facebook, and someone came on with a really long story about paint stripper and why things do it. And acrylic basically, it reconstitutes the paint.
Right.
If it's the enamel that they used to use on the cars when they were built.
Yep.
That's when it wrinkles up.
Right. Okay.
And then 2-pack wrinkles up.
Right.
But acrylic goes to jelly. And this went to jelly. And so did my panel van one because it had been resprayed.
Right.
But what I really want to talk about, see the lines where the stripes were? Well, in a minute you'll see, I don't know who that is with the shorts on, but it might have been Jared. Look at the rust where the lines were.
Holy dooly.
Now, you know the only thing I can think of is that when they did the stripes, they masked it up and cut them with blade.
Cut it with a razor blade, of course.
That's the only thing I can think of
Yeah.
that would cause that.
There's got to be something that's
That's
allowed
let
the penetration
through, and it may have been what happened. So if you're really looking at that going, what in the hell are we doing? This is dioxidine.
Yep.
And, you know, buy dioxidine with a Scotch-Brite, and then you'd wash it off with water. So I just hose it off.
Yeah.
And then air
It
dry.
works a treat.
It works good. So, and I do that, I do all the stripping before I split it. Because
Okay.
if you try and do it afterwards, the panel's really floppy.
Yeah.
So it's much easier to strip.
The chance you'll
Well,
put a
you
ding
might
in
damage
or
it, but it
damage
also means you can't push as hard on it.
Yeah.
So when you strip and paint and all, it's a lot easier when they're together. And the reason I'm not doing the back of it with strippers is I'm going to send that frame off to the blaster.
Right.
And then I get Darren to strip it off. So a bit of heat for that bitumen again and all the sealers. And then this bonnet was very bad. And that's why I've still got it, because I've welded up all the holes, and you'll see them all in a minute. So had plenty of rust. We sent the frame off, stripped all the inner panels off it. And then when we stripped this out, oh, there you are. So there's two. That's the panel van one at the same time, if I remember correctly. That's 2 years ago. And all the doors and things all getting painted. This is now everything stripped off, and all those black lines is all the rust that the basic system hasn't got rid of. So they're all rust pits, and the next couple of photos will show it really well, unless I chucked them out. As in, I had to trim down from about 800 photos
There
to
was
300.
quite a few.
So I discovered a product that's a gel,
Okay.
and I'll get Louise to put it over the top, because I don't have a photo and I can't remember what it is, but it's a rust remover. I think that's actually the word, and it's a bluish colour, like a pale blue, and as it sits there and works, it turns green and then eventually goes black.
Right.
So you put it on, puts plastic over it so it doesn't go, and it eats it out, and you end up with that, which are holes all the way through.
Just leaves you clean metal.
Rather than convert the metal, it
Yep.
actually eats away the rust, the oxidised metal, and leaves you with a lot of work to do. So I've just got it laying in there. I've tipped it up,
Yeah, on its end. Yep.
put the tape on where the mouldings and stuff might have been, so where it was going to leak,
So
and left
do
it.
your best.
I think I ended up leaving it overnight, and it cleaned it really good, and obviously that's that strip disc I'm talking about.
Yep.
And then this is, when I had a close look at this, Darren's gone around with a texture and marked where we need to weld.
You run out of textures.
So all the holes. And then what we do here is him and I combine. I get on the TIG and I go sort of zit and fill the hole up, and then he cools it with air straight after.
Yep.
And we just go dit, 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 grind them all off.
And you keep the integrity of the panel and don't warp
And if
things.
you're interested to see how that ends up, there's a video called Restoring a Bonnet or something that we did way back 2 years ago when we were doing this. And it actually shows me repairing, like straightening it all afterwards.
Cool.
But it's still in waiting, because
We haven't got a link yet, but you never know.
I can put a link on for that, so that's there, but the bonnet's not finished. And
the bonnet itself,
yeah, the van one's not finished, because we started doing the van one, but there was no repairs on the panel, and there was repairs on this.
Okay.
Now have a look at the amount of welding on the frame. So it just shows how rusty it was. And the reason we're doing the work on it is because you can't buy them.
No.
So it was like, oh well, what do you want to do, Jared?
Make do with what we've got.
And another one nowadays probably going to cost you between $2,000 and $3,000, and you'll still have to do it.
Yeah, it'll still be potentially as bad as this.
So this is where the hinges bolt on. So we've welded up some cracks and things, and then I normally put those back on just as per original. Some people like to make new ones and go further down the bonnet. I think if your hinges are in good nick and everything's been repaired correctly, you won't have a problem. The reason they crack is the hinges start to wear and bind up, and people force the bonnet against the hinge, and then the bonnet's not designed to do that.
No.
So that's the bonnet. This is after looks like I've brushed a bit of epoxy on there after we've done those bottom corners.
Yes.
And then this is where we're going to go to a video now, because this was all in steel. So I would have finished everything, doors, the whole lot, and got it to a point where I've gone, right, I'm happy with that now. So this is still all in steel, because you can see the joins up in the quarter.
Yep.
And now this is a little video. I'm pretty happy with that. 2 coats of the old PPG Vibrance epoxy urethane primer over the filler. There's no filler in that roof. It's pretty much just off in the steel off the hammer, and I flip that up. And we'll just give that another cut now with the block. See how it comes up, but it looks pretty good. So normally I do the panel, try and do as big an area as I can, but here I would think I've decided to get that corner squared up how I need it, and I'm looking to achieve this to be the shape I want with no more than probably 2 mil.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's my goal, and the reason I apply it to the whole quarter like that, and as you've said, I'm pretty good on getting it in with a plastic applicator. I would do the first foot or so, and then come straight back and do the next one, and do that in 2 goes, and then by the time I get that one in, I can come back to the bottom, and with 80 grit on the mesh, on the Merca mesh, then take the top, the face off it, and get it to a point where I can work it up. Then I trace coat it like that, and then I would go 80 again, and then if it needs more put on it, and in this case it might have because of the amount of work on this quarter, and the fact we've got a couple of different colours there. It looks like the back's not rubbed yet, like down the bottom.
Yes.
I'd then go 120, and you can see now, so I've done the whole top section, redone the top edge, and now I'm starting to do the bottom, and then a little bit of extra in around that back corner, and I'd be checking that against the other side to make sure there's a balance. And then you can see now, and what I look at here is the little bits of epoxy showing through is where I've got steel.
Yes.
So when I'm rubbing, I'm trying to get to a point where I've got steel everywhere.
And the filler's
and
just
still
making
keep,
it flat.
And still keep my shape.
Yes.
Yeah, without having to have to, like that. So I can't go any further where that line is in the middle, which is where there was probably a line where it had a dent or something in it. I've been repairing, welding through the top and all those sorts of things. But I don't want the whole thing to be filler, because if that's the case, I don't know how thick it is.
Exactly.
So that's why I do it that way.
Yep.
So you can see there where I've gone up and put some filler over where I said that lead wasn't that good. And then put a coat of epoxy on it. And then normally, and I'm not sure what I did here, but normally I'd epoxy all of that, give it a day or two, and I'd come back with probably 120 or 180 again, and sand. Just depends how it's dried out. But you can see the shape there now. It's starting to...
Looks like a hard top.
To look how it's meant to look. Could nearly be a coupe.
It could be.
So all those areas, the photo, the video earlier showed all that in epoxy, and it had been sealed. So the one here now, this is urethane in around all those edges. And I think I was just trialling some SEM product, SEM, through the PPG distribute, that's in that creamy colour, and that went in good. So that's gone in and cleaned up. You can see what I was saying about not having it real full. and then where that little bracket is in the corner there, you don't want to fill it up everywhere because there's nowhere for the moisture to get out then. So I'm not looking to try and, I would have painted, well they didn't come off, but I'd be squirting some WD in there after, some fish oil or whatever in there afterwards. So urethane in around that boot rubber channel, just to make sure all those overlaps and double ups are all good. And then that is the left hand side quarter there. You can see the same thing with the, well that's even a better one, where the filler's on and there's not a lot of it.
No.
That's the aim. And that top corner's where I've been welding and shaping, and so there's that whole quarter. So we're in the booth now, and it's masked around the windows, so I'm getting ready to put that video on that we watched earlier. I would say. So that's all primed up. It makes a difference with the video, doesn't it?
It does.
So that's the PPG Vibrance Epoxy Urethane Primer, and then once you're ready to go to paint stage, we then would put primer on, but this is an epoxy primer. So that boot lid, you can see now I've gone all the way back to steel across the back, so that had all been bent and reshaped, so there's a bit more filler on the right hand side there, and I've welded the left hand side. And then the doors, that mustn't have been a really badly damaged one, I think it was the other one. So the coupe's getting real close now. I've got a bit to do on that left hand door. Boots, this is the first coat of epoxy on that boot. So we took the skin off that, and it had been damaged in an accident on this back corner, so we had to straighten it up. It's looking fairly nice now. And the roof on this car, this is a vinyl roof car, and it was in very good condition considering. So it's only had a little bit of work, but the lead work from the factory is nowhere near as good on a vinyl roof car, so it had a little bit of work to be done there. And this was the really bad quarter. The lines look pretty good now. And then in here, just need a bit of stone guard now, but it's looking pretty good as well. So I had to remake the boot opening as well. So we replaced this panel with one of the modified ones that we sell, and then remade all these sides. Kept the original corners, these weren't too bad, but put a new edge on here and put a panel across here as well. So it's looking nice. I reckon that was the final job. The photo that we're looking at now has got the tape and all on it and the guard back on where I'm doing the final sand that I'm sure was before that video, but I'm not 100% sure. But here it is now after that video, I would imagine. 2/3
of a car.
So yeah, so we've got ourselves all the way up to the guards.
Yep.
And then this is where it basically left from, and there's another couple of little quick videos that I did for Facebook, I would imagine. So that's just about a wrap for this one. So it's going back to the owner now. So that was a repo. Just about fixing that quarter, but it snowballed like they all do. So paintable bumper. Yeah. We ended up doing the plenum as well, and de-skinned the doors and the boot lid. And that's now had a skimmer filler, and then a couple of block backs. Probably a little bit more than I'd normally do in epoxy, but because it's getting sealed up for storage now, just wanted to make sure that it had plenty of protection. Where normally I would have went for primer and then blocked the primer, so pretty happy about the way it's come out. All cleaned up. By the time that gets painted, that rubber will be nice and flat, though.
Got a few bits and pieces to sort out with the primer. A few little nicks here and there, but all in all, looks pretty good.
Righto, so you would have seen this one come in with a big dent up the arse of it. So myself and the neighbour Dave, we hooked it up and dragged that out, and then I spent a fair bit of time straightening the steel up and get it pretty close. It's had a little skim of bog as well, and now it's sitting in PPG epoxy. Going back to the owner, it's going to go into storage for a while until he sorts out some of the other bits and pieces, and then make his mind up what he's going to do with it. So it's out of here and we can move on to other things.
Very good.
So there we go, Dale. So that's, I think, the end of the story from the photos that I had, and that went back to Jared's place. And
Well, most of it did. You still got the bonnet.
I still got the bonnet, and I haven't spoken to him for, I don't know, for quite a few months now. We speak on Facebook and stuff every now and again. But the plan was to go back and for him to keep cleaning things up himself. And, get the engine bay stripped and a bit of primer and stuff on it. And, maybe at some stage we might paint it for him, or if he can find someone up there to do it. So it's just another one saved, I guess.
Yes.
And, it was an opportunity to... I think that's the biggest dent I've ever pulled, but I said to him, I can't do any damage. It's already,
you can't make it any
gone.
worse.
Yeah.
No.
So that's just another one, and I have found a couple more little jobs that we can throw up.
Very good.
We actually tubbed a Commodore Ute, you and I.
We did.
So I found them photos today.
A green monster.
Green monster, so we might do that one. But thanks everybody for tuning in again.
Yep.
And don't forget to subscribe. Everybody knows now that I answer all your questions. So if you've got questions or queries, and even if they're technical or just the fact you want to tell me a story about the car you had that someone was...
It's all interesting
reading. It's all interesting
and
reading for me and for you and all the other viewers. So do that. Thanks very much to Lovells. So they're about to, in May, they're launching a new store up at Campbelltown.
Cool.
With some new product releases that I got an email about today, so that'll be interesting. And I look forward to continuing to work all year with our event program with them.
Yep.
And these are really a bonus for them now because I'm just finding what I can to put some stuff up. And then, stay tuned.
That's it. More to come.
More to come. Thanks for your time, Dale.
Thanks, Howard.
Thank you all for following.
See you next
Bye
time.
for now.